It is often quoted, of course, that on the day that both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died, 4th of July, 1826, Adams inaccurately said, "Thomas Jefferson still survives." And we historians and others have quoted that ever since then, not only to say that it was a great coincidence on that day that was almost heaven sent, 50 years after the Declaration, but it's one way of saying that when you have an historic figure, especially Thomas Jefferson, in a way his life only begins at the moment he passes, because the value of an historic figure in American society is often how later generations interpret his or her legacy and how they use it. That's been nowhere more true than Thomas Jefferson. And one way to understand it is to look at the way that later American presidents have used what they knew of Thomas Jefferson. We were talking a moment ago about whether later generations understand history and whether presidents do. And the answer is sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But in the cases in which they did, Jefferson loomed large. Not terribly long after Jefferson's departure, James Polk looked back on especially the Louisiana Purchase as a precedent for what he did to expand American territory. We love Polk because Polk erected a statue of Jefferson on the north lawn of the White House, which unfortunately was removed in the 1870s. I wish it were still there. But he looked very much at what Jefferson did as a precedent for what he was doing. When Lincoln became president, you would have thought that at least one aspect of Jefferson was not appealing to him, and it wasn't. The idea that states could object to what the federal government was doing, exactly the opposite of what Lincoln was trying to do. But as the war wore on, Lincoln harked back much more to Jefferson's enduring idea that all men are created equal. By the end of the Civil War, Lincoln described himself as much more radical, and he attributed that to the legacy of Thomas Jefferson. Not every president has been quite so positive. Theodore Roosevelt had a great eagerness to demolish particularly the reputations of Andrew Jackson and Thomas Jefferson as the two icons of the Democratic Party. And so more than once, Roosevelt would denounce Jefferson as the most incapable executive ever to occupy the White House. He was worse about Thomas Paine, whom he called a filthy atheist. But TR was not someone who was exactly head of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation and what we try to do. But his cousin, Franklin Roosevelt, made up for that. Thomas Jefferson was his hero from the beginning of his presidency. FDR had the idea that there should be a Jefferson Memorial in Washington. And if it had not been for him, it probably wouldn't have happened. There were people, particularly ladies, who were crying out against the destruction of trees on the site and actually chained themselves to the trees before they were cut down for the memorial. And Roosevelt said, "I have a solution to this, which is we'll dig big holes and replant the trees, but only replant them with the ladies in the holes with the mud put over them too, as well as the roots of the trees." Slightly more seriously, Roosevelt, while fighting World War II, spoke in terms of defeating tyranny, and there was more than enough grist for him in the legacy of Thomas Jefferson. This has continued to evolve all the way up to, and you'll see it in the new film here if you haven't, 1989, when the Cold War ended, the contagion of Jeffersonian democracy spread around the world. Thomas Jefferson lived once again. So here we are in a time that is as challenging as any in American history, and one of the fascinating things for those of us who are historians in the next few years will be to see which of Jefferson's ideas are adopted, which are debated, which are ignored, especially by Barack Obama, our new president. President Obama got up this morning, he would have looked out his bedroom window, would have seen the Jefferson Memorial, went downstairs, walked over the Jefferson Colonnade to the Oval Office. At least symbolically, those clues are there. They will presumably keep his mind on the president that we venerate today. And so my point is that as generations look back through history, and particularly look back at Thomas Jefferson, I was talking to our great friend Susan Stein, who had so much to do with what we're doing here this morning last night. The way to celebrate Jefferson is not to say this is a man who was wonderful in all his aspects, but what he would love is that here we are so many years later, we're still debating his ideas as if he were here just yesterday. And in a way, thanks to what we're doing here, we are. So thank you all for being here. Thank all of you trustees, our great Jeffersonian leaders, Dan and Leslie, all those partners who've helped to make this possible and make it even more likely that in the future Americans can say with us today that Thomas Jefferson still lives. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Michael. This concludes the formal portion of our program. Now is when the real fun begins. I invite you to spend the day with us and explore the wonders of the mountaintop and this new Thomas Jefferson Visitor Center and Smith Education Center. Before you embark on your day, however, we have one more surprise for you. My predecessor, Dan Jordan, loves nothing more than a marching band. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big welcome to the University of Virginia Marching Band and Wind Ensemble, under the direction of William Pease.